Good morning. So today is my first day starting at my services, waiting for my dear old colleagues to arrive so we can go to this retreat and do some hacking, or it's hackathon days. Anywho, so I thought that now that I'm starting at this new project, I'll talk to you about something that may or may not be it's going to be hopefully pretty relevant to what I do or what I'm going to do now. And I'm going to talk to you about how to inherit a code base, or how to take over a code base, or the responsibility or whatever. Now, for the most part, you are going to hear when you start out that documentation is very important, and that you have all these good practices. When you first start being a programmer, you're going to be told a lot of stuff that are going to be conveyed to you in a fashion that makes you believe that this is the way things should work. However, for those of us who have been doing this for a while, you probably know that for the most part these things are not true. Usually what you hear when you start out is that you should always write unit tests, and a good code base has a good amount of documentation, comments, all that good stuff, good practices. There's a well-maintained code base. Whenever you take over a code base, you can just, for the most part, you can throw that right out the window. The only projects I've ever seen that holds true to these best practices in any meaningful fashion is large open source projects, like really large, like this type of thing where we're talking React, Angular, we're talking like these massive frameworks that are provided to, or like frameworks. But most companies and most projects don't actually have that. So I usually have a small process for how to deal with this. The first time, for the most part, if you're lucky enough, you have somebody at the project that you're not just left out to hang in the wind, where you have at least somebody who can help you figure out how these things work. When I started at Ticketmaster, that was not the case. I literally had no one who had any type of really meaningful knowledge about the code base. And so to me, the first thing that is very important when you start is to find the entry points to the application. So if you're fortunate enough to work on a server-side type of thing, you usually have a bunch of controllers. If most likely you're using the MVC pattern, and it's very beneficial for you to have a look at the controller routes. If you know the routes, you very quickly can see what type of structure, like an overview of the structure of the server, because the endpoints are always the entry point into the server. So if you start there at the very, very top of the application, you can start to see what logic, or like the abstractions that are there, then kind of get the feel for what concepts are associated with that specific endpoint. Now, that's not going to be enough to get a full understanding of the code base, obviously, but it will get you started in understanding like what the scope of the code base is. Next up is to take a look at the dependencies, and this is really important. Now, make sure that you have an understanding of like what packages are used, and have a rough idea of what they're being used for, and what you're going to like kind of have to read up on a little bit. You don't have to be a master of everything, because like it's gonna come to you if it's a really large code base. There's no way for you to absorb all of this in just one day. So don't be scared if taking over a code base takes you a while. I mean, the average time it takes to onboard a person to a new project, if you're starting at a new company, is between 3 to 6 months roughly. So, and it might take even longer than that. I mean, shit, I still don't know. I don't work at Ticketmaster anymore now, and I still don't know even half of how the system works. And I was working there for 2 years. So as you can imagine, it varies. Always in computer science, it depends. So when you have an understanding of where the entry points are to, like if it's in JavaScript, say take React for example, you need to know where all the where are you latching on the top level components to the DOM. If you know where this tree structure starts, you can start understanding, okay, this is how it's all fitting together. And when you have an understanding of the entry points and you have an understanding of the rough, like the big technologies and dependencies that are there, the next thing for you to understand is what practices are used in, like, how do you, like, what practices have been used, like, are they unit tests, how are they written, are they well maintained? And you start asking yourself questions about, okay, what are the best practices that have been neglected? Because, and I mean, it sounds horrible that I'm saying this, but it's so common that it's so uncommon that best practices are followed in any meaningful way, that you will actually be better off starting to ask yourself what the best practices are most likely when you start. The reason why that is because for the most part, when you start a new project, you have that extra burst of energy, you have that extra will to do something well and to make improvements. It always starts the same way. There's two things that always happen whenever somebody new starts at a project. The first and foremost thing is the code mocking. And the code mocking is that the new person looks at the crap pile that is the code and laughs and says, how could you do this? And you're like outraged because you're coming there with fresh eyes. And the second thing is that you start trying to improve things. And what the third thing that always happens, and that takes a while, is that you get you realize that you can't change it all, you can't make it all perfect, so you give up and you get used to the way that the overall code base has been structured. This is something that touches on a concept I've been talking about in the past, where if a problem gets too big, or a concept within the code base gets too big, a class or a way of working or whatever, it becomes almost impossible and very demotivating to change that. You don't actually change it for the most part. You just live with it. And that always happens. So take that, write down the things that you want to improve. Make a little list of things that you don't like and you would like to change when you're first looking through the code base with fresh eyes, because if you wait too long, you're sooner or later going to just go, oh well, I don't care anymore, I don't have the energy to fix all of these things, so I'll just make it work. And then trust me, this is not your fault. This always happens. It always happens. I've never seen somebody who has this, you pick your battles. You always do, and sooner or later, some things you're going to accept and live with, and some things you may still want to improve. So those are the three main things I think you should do when you inherit a new code base. And the first and foremost thing you should think about, or rather the thing you should keep in the back of your head when you inherit this new code base, is to remember that since you are now in charge of the code base, or you're going to be there to contribute to the code base, act like a professional. Don't rewrite, don't suggest a complete rewrite if there's not a really good reason for you to do that. Motivate your suggestions and warn your employers or your comrades. You just mention that, have you ask them about stuff do you see that you're doing this thing here? Are you sure that that's the way you want to go with it? Be a professional, not warn them of potential issues that you can see, and just mention them. If they want to allow you time to rewrite that, then rewrite it, but don't start going wild and just make everything your own, because remember that odds are that if you rewrite everything just because you want things to work in a certain way, the odds are that you're going to break it and you're not going to provide much value to the project. So, suggest improvements and lobby for those improvements, and do them if they're small enough. Then if they're really small, you don't have to really ask about them. That's just good practice. But start off doing that, and then make sure this is the most important thing. Make sure that you talk to anyone who knows anything about the project. Go to lunch with people. Make sure that any information that you can get from actual people you get, because for the most part documentation is going to be very scarce and very incomplete, and most of it will not even be relevant sometimes. So you will naturally think that, somebody's doing this thing in the code here, I wonder why they did that. There's probably a really good reason why they're doing that, or maybe there's a really good reason they're not doing that thing there. That happens all the time and happens to me too. So And honestly, sometimes there is a really good reason, so you ask about it, and sometimes it's just dead code. Somebody refactored something at some point, and they simply forgot about this piece of code. So it is a process to take over ownership of a code base, and yeah, these are basically the best tips I can give you. Hope they were useful.